Hey everyone. So let's build a very basic cap table for a startup for a new company. It's just being created, formed like right now. And it's a company called Busy Bee Enterprises. There are three founders, Sally, Juan, and Izzy. They're going to each own a third of common stock of the company, and they're going to split 20 million shares of common stock. They will also want a stock plan, and they want the number of shares available under the stock plan to be 10% of the cap table. Now, this 10% is kind of the tricky part. That's where the iterative calculations are going to come in. But first, let's just build this cap table from scratch. So for speed here, I'm going to put in the name of the company. Busy Bee Enterprises. I put the date that I last edited the cap table, just so that I know last time it was updated, and it's just kind of good practice to have that. Now, this is, again, very basic cap table of the total number of authorized shares. Authorized shares just means the max number of shares that you can issue under, according to the charter or according to that certificate of incorporation. It's not what's outstanding, what's issued, but it's what is available to be issued. So basically, it's just that max number that you can assign to somebody. So you have the authorized number of shares, the total number of founder shares, which let's say is in common shares and maybe FF preferred, which is also called founders preferred. And there'll be a stock plan, which will be 10% of the cap table. So let's put in those numbers. So we have 20 million shares of founder stock. Actually, let's do it this way. Let's do 20 million shares of common. I like to put commas in just for my own benefits to make sure I got all the zeros right. There's 0 FF preferred. And if I was doing this, very detailed, I would do the common plus the FF preferred. And I recently built in formulas just in case anyone changes their mind. You just have to change some of the inputs. It's much faster than if you actually went into this very mechanically. I'll come back to the authorized number of shares in a second. Now here's the 10% of the cap table. I'm gonna put the 10% here again in case like the client wants to change this. Put this a little border around it, and I'll even put a color so that I know it's there. So we'll come back to what this number is in a second. Now, let's build up the structure of the cap table. So I'm going to just copy and paste this for speed. So we have name of the person, common stock if preferred options, number of shares outstanding, number of shares that float diluted, and let's say also percent of the float diluted. A line below here. Okay. So we have Sally, Juan, and Izzy. And let's put here shares available under the stock plan. And we'll put a line across. Perfect. Put total here. And just to sort of build the structure, let's do the sum. Let's sum up all the rows above. Should also up to 0 because there's nothing there. Perfect. Now we know that they're going to split these shares a third, a third, and a third. So 2 1/3 times this common shares. So this would be 6 here. I want to lock in this cell because I'm just going to copy this down. I don't want it to move. I always want it to reference the same cell. Copy it down. But wait a minute. There's not a full share here. There's 0.67. So we have to fix that. We have to round down the number of shares. You can't have a fraction of a share. Comma 0. Perfect. Now I'm going to have one person to have 2 more shares. So good for them. Good for them. 20 million here. Now, there's no FF preferred, but I'm just going to do the good hygiene thing of a third times this cell here. Oops, equals 1/3 times cell here. And lock in the cell. Okay, now the number of options. They don't have any options because they're founders. But now we're going to get into how many options are currently available in the plan. So we're going to have this feedback to this cell here. We'll come back to this cell. So I will just put a little yellow here. Perfect. Now, this number, let's fill the rest of this out. Number of shares outstanding. So that will be this plus that. And if there were any options, it would also include that. Are none, so 20 million. Great. There's nothing here because there's no shares outstanding. It's a new company, right? This is going to be what is available, but right now there's nothing outstanding. Okay, so this is going to be 0. But we will go into, it will be part of what is considered the fully diluted number of shares. So the number fully diluted here is this number. And then it's going to be that number of options, the number of shares available under the plan. Right now it's showing 0 because it's feeding from nothing. And we have 20 million. Now, let's look at that percentage here. We got this, the percentage of fully diluted shares is going to be the number of shares divided by a total. And we want to hard code that. Make that a percentage. Copy it down in here, right? There we go. Okay, now comes the tricky part. Now, we want this to be 10% of the cap table to be the stock plan. But if we just did 10% of this 20 million here, you know what's actually really what's this 20 million here, right? That's all the shares that are currently outstanding. You get a number, it's not quite 10%. It wouldn't be the right number because you have to build in the stock plan into like the entire calculation for 10%. It's an iterative calculation, meaning that you have to solve for the right number that will get to your 10% of the fully diluted number of shares. So how do we do that? The first thing we have to do is put on iterative calculations. So if you're in Word or Mac, if you're in Mac or Windows, excuse me, it'll be a different spot. But in my Mac, I go to Excel and then I'd go to Preferences. And I think in Windows, it would be, I think it's File and then Options. You're going to find something that says Formulas or Calculations. And you want to use iterative calculations. So mine's turned on. You don't have it turned on, it will result in an error. But mine is turned on, so that's great. So now think about this. We want this to be 10% of the cap table. It shouldn't be 10% of this number here. It shouldn't be 10% of this number here. It shouldn't be 10% of this number here. It needs to be 10% of the fully diluted number of shares. But again, like that fully diluted number of shares is going to include this stock plan. So bring this down here. Oh, interesting. See here, and again, it makes a fraction, so I'm going to round down. You can't have a fraction of a share. And there you go. Using this, having iterative calculation turned on allowed me to use Excel to figure out, to basically seek that number out that gets to this 10% here. Without it, if I just did 10% of this number, the 20 million, it would be wrong. Now let's say turn off iterative calculation, what would that look like? Now it's say it's going to give a circular reference or formula refers to its own cell. So now you're seeing this error message, right? It's saying that this is a circular reference. So that's why you need to make sure that it's running the iterative calculation so it knows to continuously be looking to find the right number. And once you do that, that error message, the error should come off. Yeah. There you go. Yep. And that's the basic cat table. Now it's going to be more complicated when it breaks, when your Excel spreadsheet breaks for venture financing because there's a lot more inputs. But this is just sort of a good foundation to get you started on the idea of iterative calculations and how numbers, how it's a useful tool for getting to the right number. Thanks, everyone.